All right, everybody. Welcome to another Developer Live cast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Placer, and we got another great one for you tonight. We're going to be talking to a game developer who just released his game Valeguard a few months ago, and he was able to do it without any programming whatsoever. And he's here to talk about it, as well as I'm sure any random number of game design topics that pop up. So, please welcome from Lost Tower Games, Ryan Drag.
Hey,
Hey, Ryan, how
how's
are
it all
you
going?
doing?
Good. I'm doing great. Just hanging out here in my office. I work from home, so this is
I,
it.
I know this is my luxurious office for people watching behind me here.
Yeah.
So, how are
Awesome.
you doing?
Doing good. Just I guess I was kind of looking forward to this today. Never done anything sort of like this, especially live. I think that's fun.
Hmm.
So yeah, I hope some folks pop in, give it a look.
Well, we shall see. It's always been odd with some of these live casts. Sometimes we get a lot of people on, sometimes it's just the two of us talking about game design, like uninterrupted for an hour and a half. But we'll
Well,
see
I
what happens.
mean, I'm all about that too. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this stuff, especially live. So
Hmm.
cool.
But it is great to have you on. Like I just said about a minute ago, you just released Veilguard. I think that was about, is that a month or 2 months ago from right now?
Well, let's see. I think it was August
Okay.
20 something. So yeah, September, October. Now we're into November. Over
Hmm.
2 months.
All right. And we'll talk more about that probably in the next few minutes. But since this is your first time on the cast, I always like to give our new guests a chance to kind of talk about themselves, kind of what is your background when it comes to game design?
Well, it's a weird background. I guess technically I started as an animator. So a while back, I used to work at Midway Games a long time ago, back in Chicago when they were still a company, and I just animated. And then I moved out to Colorado, got a more open job as just doing all the art at a small game company. So once I started doing that, I started seeing more aspects of game development. And then I finally went to Backflip Studios, which is out in Boulder, Colorado. And I was the art director there, but I was also kind of a starting member of the company. So we did all kinds of stuff. And that's where I started getting into all of the different pieces and getting more interested in doing more. So I was at Backflip for about 8 years, and that's where I learned, most of what I know about Unity, and still doing a lot of art while I was there. But as I got more, interested in the other aspects of building a game, especially design, I started branching out from there. So eventually, I left that studio to start my own company. I worked briefly with one other person, and then even branched out from that to just work totally solo by
Mm-hmm.
myself. So that's my background. Started as an animator and slowly worked my way into being a generalist.
Great. What kind of games did you work on at Midway?
Oh geez. So I was like a super low level animator. We did a lot of motion capture cleanup, which is not fun. If you've ever seen motion capture, it looks really cool, but before it gets to that point, a lot of it's like janky and like there's weird stuff going on. I worked on like Blitz 2, a couple like canceled games. I worked on like a Ballers sequel, so some sports games. There's this game they were working on called Driver. I don't know if it ever came out. It had like Vin Diesel in it, but it was all cinematic stuff,
Hmm.
and it was mostly cinematic, and it was like all motion capture cleanup. So someone would get like tackled in blitz, and like all their little capture balls would come flying off, and then like they would just like one of their arms would be going all crazy, and I'd have to like go in there and just reanimate part of their body, or it was just a mess. But it was a really cool experience, and it was great to just get like tons of work. So I got to work on a whole bunch of different games there. So that was fun. The studio in Chicago was also the animation headquarters. So like all the satellite studios requested animation from there. So you didn't necessarily see the other people working on the game all the time. Bit odd. Someone would just be like, "Here's the animation we need." They're in LA or something, and then you just do it.
Nice. So you were responsible for like when we see like in games and like the rag dolls get completely like messed up or like the bodies are sort of like jangling out of control. That was like kind of what you had to fix.
Well, that was certainly what it would look like if you, yeah, if you didn't fix it. That's exactly what it looks like. All these like IK problems and crazy weird joint issues. But it would be, we had good days, we had bad days. I think the tackling was like just really hard to clean up because the motion capture stuff would just get all trashed. But then there would be like, all kinds of regular cinematics, people dancing, people just doing regular stuff, and it'd be fine. That would work great.
Hmm. I
I also
guess
did touchdown celebrations, which were pretty fun. Like when
nice.
someone gets a touchdown, they're like doing crazy, goofy stuff.
I guess as a quick tangent, just regarding like motion capture, have like the technology like evolved at all? Like, do they still use like the little like balls on the like the suit, or has there been like any like evolution in that regard?
It's a good question. I haven't worked with motion capture in a long time, but I mean, aside from some animations you can just buy on like asset stores, but actually recording it, it's been a long time, so I'm sure it's much, much better. I've seen at conferences and things a variety of systems. A lot of them don't use the balls.
Hmm.
Some of them like use like a full suit.
Yeah.
Some of them just use camera. Like they'll just motion capture based off of you, and the background is kind of like static, like a green screen sort of environment.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of different ways. Back when I was at Midway, it was kind of like just kind of getting
Hmm.
going. The systems are really expensive, and I'm sure it's not as tedious as it is, as it was back then.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure. Like again, like when it comes to this kind of technology, like everything moves very fast. I mean, right now, of course, the big hot ticket is VR and even AR. And I mean, I did a little presentation on this last year, and even back then, like things were already they were talking about like next gen stuff. Like full suits that can simulate body temperature or stuff like that.
Yeah, it'd be pretty sweet. I have a Vive, uh, and previously to Valeguard, I put out a Vive game,
Hmm.
which is pretty fun. That was when I was working with the one other person, and we, I think we did a pretty good job on that for being our first VR game. But it's incredibly tedious and demanding to work in VR. It's like I don't know, just having the system on your face all day is
Hmm.
just pretty crazy. And then on top of that, you got to run at 60 frames a second, or you get like nauseous. So your game's got to be pretty tight technically.
Yeah, and that is definitely a topic I would like to have somebody on for. It's probably a little too big for just this cast, but yeah,
Yeah.
I'll probably make an announcement about this on Twitter. But for anybody watching us now who's working on like a full VR game, let me know. Oop, getting like a bunch of buzzes on Discord there, but we'll just have to ignore that. Isn't it always fun when you get all the little pop-ups? Let's see. Oh, I see. Discord is being very weird. Let me pull you back up here. Did I lose your video? Let's see. There we go. That was weird. It's still getting used to Discord when it comes to doing these chats as well.
Uh,
I think everything still looks good. Uh-oh. Don't tell me you got...
Lost you.
Uh-oh. Can you still hear me? Ooh. Uh-oh. Test, test.
I
The...
am not hearing you.
Oh, no.
Should I pop back out and pop back in?
Sure. Alright, the joys of
Okay.
doing things live, everybody.
Let's close this down. I don't want to cancel the stream or anything, but I'm just going to pop out here.
Now you can see me in stereo. Alright, test, test. Hello. Alright, I'll leave the call and see.
Hmm.
Alright, 1 second while we try and fix some of these issues. Let's see. Come on. All right, test.
Yeah, I can hear
There
you.
we go. Perfect. That'll be great
Okay.
for the blooper reel, I suppose.
Nah, it
Oh.
happens.
Mm-hmm. All right, make sure everything looks good here. All right. So after that little brief situation, let's get back.
Intermission.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Getting back to Valeguard, then, I guess, how long did you work on the game? Like, when did it first start?
It started about October 2017, maybe September. I'm trying to think. I'm just when that's when I kind of had the initial idea. So I started from scratch with that, and then I worked pretty hard on it for
Mm-hmm.
about 7 months. It was full time. I don't have like a day job. This is my job, and I got it out in early access in like May, I believe. October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May. 7, 8 months to early access, and then uh, June, July, August, 3 more months in early access. So
Okay.
seven and 10 total. That's kind of how I look at it.
All right. And as you said, you worked as an animator at Midway and your other studio, as well as working on your VR game. So was Veilguard kind of like your first like attempt at, like a full product?
Well, I've been on a team making games for I don't know 11 years or something, and I guess I put out like a whole bunch of games, but this one it's separate because it was my first solo project, and definitely the first game that I've made without involving any programmers.
Mm-hmm.
So the last game was called Just in Time, the VR game, and that had one other programmer on it. It's still a ton of work, still very cool process, but this is my first solo game.
Cool. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the design in probably the next minute. But for people watching us right now, either live or recorded, could you kind of give them like what the elevator pitch is for Veilguard?
All right, so I guess the elevator pitch would be it's a tower defense game with RTS elements, um, and you know that's kind of it at its basic level. But it's a mashup. It's a mashup of a variety of different mechanics. You go from town to town defending for a set amount of time, 15 days, 20 days, 30 days, and each town you successfully defend from waves of monsters. You grow your party of heroes and your items and gear, and eventually you have a big last stand at this castle. So it's a single player game. It's semi casual depending on your difficulty, and yeah, like I said, based in tower defense, but it's also kind of got a lot of other genres. Specifically, I guess city building would be the other big genre.
Mm-hmm. I guess so. Where did you come up with the idea for Veilguard from?
Well, I guess there's a bunch of games that I liked playing, like growing up and young adulthood. I guess I played a lot of Lords of the Realm and Lords of the Realm 2. 2 is better, and that is where a lot of the economy of the game came from. Like I just wanted this like season based kind of you task out your work and then you set your people to work and they get it done depending on how many you have. So that was kind of a lot of the inspiration there. It doesn't work exactly the same, but I really like that mechanic. And some of the heroes and ways they work is kind of like a Warcraft 3 era thing. And I also wanted something like, I'm really busy. I have a 3-year old. I wanted something that I can like play and enjoy and then like get up
Mm-hmm.
if it's 5 minutes or like I'm gonna sit down for 5 hours. I wanted something kind of easy to pick up and put down.
Yeah. And that is a really good topic, like right there, Ryan, about trying to get that pick up and play feel right in a lot of these games. And it's one thing that I definitely see, I think, from a lot of independent developers. They tend to struggle with when it's like their first game or trying to move to a new genre. Because as I'm sure you're aware of, I'm sure as our audience, there are plenty of games out there that take a very long time to jump into, whether it's due to a learning curve or simply just due to the amount of investment required to actually make some kind of progress. And again, this could probably we have so many really good topics that can fill their own cast. But while developing Valeguard, I guess how much did like the game I guess change, or did it change at all from your original vision to when it went to early access and then to release?
So I kind of said this in a couple other interviews. There's like it hasn't changed like a ton when you consider how much games do change. Like I heard Dead Cells was supposed to be a tower defense game when it started, so it didn't have any crazy, completely flipping genre changes. I'm pretty happy with that. It had to do a bit with the initial prototype. In the first 2 months, I had a prototype up and running that was one town, a couple units, a couple structures, and it was the gist. It was vertical slice of Veilguard, and it felt good. And I was like, this is where it's going. I had in the back of my mind, I'm going to have different towns. There's going to be these random events. There's going to be all this other stuff. But more or less, I had the core loop kind of down pat, and I felt pretty good about that. So I just kept going that way. I didn't make any huge changes after that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say there were some things I probably added that, I don't know, weren't in the original idea, but not massive. Like horses. I never planned on adding horses, but I just got working on it one day and I was like, this is just fun. I want to see if I can pull it off.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was pretty consistent with where it started.
And that's always good to hear because I've heard stories from developers, like you said with like a Dead Cells example, that the game just goes like this like massive change from beginning to end as the developers just trying to figure out what works, what didn't work, that kind of thing. And I guess by extension, I guess my next question for you, Ryan, is while you were developing Veilguard, were there like any like hiccups like that? Like, did you have to do any kind of course corrections in terms of your design?
Oh boy, there's lots of hiccups. Shoot. I mean, I don't program. That's like the biggest issue and the cause of many hiccups. And maybe someday I'll learn how. I've tried a lot. It's maybe I'm slightly dyslexic. I don't really. I just take so long to read and understand code.
Mm.
There's a little script that I have to upload Veilguard to Steam, and it's really simple. And just getting that, I didn't write it even.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that's like free from Steam, and I just to get that to work with my game, so has my app ID and uploads it correctly. Like that took like 2 days of just messing with it and getting stuff wrong. So there's instances like that where more design and art focused. So when I run into a technical hurdle, it can take disproportionately longer to fix. Hopefully over time we get better at that. But some other examples are it's pretty good headache. I thought Steam achievements were going to be a lot easier. That was actually kind of a pain, and it shouldn't be. Course corrections. A lot of things I just like would start on, and when I find that it was just too demanding for like the scope that I was going for, I would avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
There were some things that I still would like to have in the game that I just wasn't able to do as one person as my first solo game. I wanted to have more variation in heroes, more variation in quests and things. I still think there's a lot and it's really fun, but some of these things became a technical hurdle for me later on.
Yeah. And I'm the same way when it comes to programming. Like, I understand the logic of it, but when it comes to actually like sitting down memorizing like what code to put into a game, that's when my brain just shuts off. Like, this is great. Like, I can sit and have like a 5 hour conversation about game design like it's nothing. We started talking about scripting and stuff like that. That's not going to happen here. And
Yeah.
I have a fan here, Mike, who, if we may have summoned him while talking about how bad we are at programming. I'm sure he's going to leave a comment if he watches this recorded later on about this. But it's definitely a very interesting aspect, and I think we'll probably spend mostly like the back half or the final parts of our cast talking more about the visual sculpting that you do with Veilguard. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But Sticking with the design, one thing that I thought was very interesting was, as you said, like, when you pick what town you go to, it determines what your rewards are, and then that will affect the next round, and so on. I guess, what was the inspiration for that kind of design element?
Well, I guess that one just was part of a collection of ideas to help make the game as replayable as possible. I wanted people to have. I like these kind of games where you can experiment and explore in the game, and it helps it make failure not as like defeating if the new play is in its own right fun and different and exciting. It's easier to just restart and replay it again. So I came up with just a few little things to try and make it as replayable as possible, and I wanted you to not have as much access to like equipment, so you'd have to explore and play through the game a few times to like see what's out there. It's also less intimidating. Like I didn't want you to have all of the things, so you start with just a couple of things, a structure, a unit. I guess if anything, one of the games that does that really well that I've just played so much is FTL. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you're a fan too. So I guess you could say that's inspired by FTL because that game is like one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, it actually reminded me a lot of the game Sacrifice by, I think that was
Oh,
Shiny back in the day.
yes, also a fantastic, I
Yeah.
think, slightly underappreciated game.
Oh, yeah. That was the first game I bought on GOG. Like, the second that servers went up and I saw they had Sacrifice, I had to buy it.
Yeah, you got to pick and grow your spell options and troop options like in a very similar way as you progress through the campaign.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah. Now, with Valeguard's design, as you said, there is a lot in terms of randomization RNG involved with like the various quests and the events that can pop up. And how did you go about, or what was your approach to trying to balance that so that it can't be a nice surprise when something good happens, but you don't want like a bad event to completely ruin like 15 days of work on a city?
Yeah, admittedly, it could be better balanced. It's very hard to balance something when
Yeah.
you want there to be risk and reward, but if you push it even just a little bit too far, then it can like destroy us. There's a few encounters in the game that if you pick the wrong thing and it rolls the wrong thing and you're in the wrong, it can just wreck your whole town like
Hmm.
in one event. So um, it was tough. I wanted there to be like these spikes in like difficulty and like so people have like real fear of things. Like I didn't want there to be this vanilla kind of, oh well, no matter what you pick, it's either kind of good or kind of bad, but it's not going to
Hmm.
affect you too much. I wanted it to have weight to it, but unfortunately, that weight comes in real hard sometimes. So I have a couple little kind of algorithms that help balance resources. They're not real code, but they're just a way to scale as the game goes on. And that helps out a lot because then I don't have to go through and change every scenario and everything. But even still, it's depending on your situation and your difficulty setting, there are spikes that are just unbelievable when they all the planets align.
Hmm.
One such quest I would say would be the giants and the beanstalk. If you get that early on and you happen to have the requirements met to get that event, then and you hit the the answers that roll the giants, then you're going to be in big trouble. The giants are pretty hard in your first town, so
Hmm.
that's something I think if I could go back and do Veilguard from the start or a Veilguard 2, I'll have a much more sophisticated event system.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's always the challenge when we talk about roguelike design. Of course, you mentioned FTL a few minutes ago, that you always have to be really careful just how much RNG is a factor. And like with that game, I ran into a lot of trouble just getting really bad events or not getting what I needed to beat the final boss. And then it didn't matter what I did, I was dead basically. That form 2 of that boss fight can wreck you if you don't know what you're doing or you just get unlucky.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, it is. It is a bit frustrating to go all the way to the end of the game and then get wrecked. And you
Hmm.
know, I don't know. On Valeguard, it does have a lot of the similarities to that. Although I don't think it's necessarily as due to your
Hmm.
luck. It's more due to it's just really hard at the end.
Hmm.
So you're generally in a good place no matter what you do. You could be, depending on your items, in a much better place, but like baseline, you're pretty set where I had expected people to be, no matter how you play through it, if you survive that far.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
with like, and I guess two other systems I want to ask you about, Ryan. The first one would be like the units themselves. You have, of course, your hero units that you get them over the course of the campaign, the event, and they kind of stick with you on each map. And then you have like the general military. Like I think it was like an archer. I think there was a spearman. I saw like the option get like a horse related ones. I think there was like a knight maybe. I don't think I got that far to unlock it. But what was like the general idea behind like the unit designs for Valeguard?
So that's actually something that did change.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, I wanted to have units be much more fluid and where you would build the resources, axes, armor, spears, and bows. And depending on what resources you had, you could build different units. So an example would be you might build a spearman and then give him armor, and he becomes a different unit. He becomes like a guardsman or something, and then he has now armor and a spear, and you could give him an axe, and he changes even a little bit, becomes even stronger or something slightly. So you could kind of like create your armies. That ended up being problems from two angles. One, it is technically a lot more difficult the branching of that creates a lot of content. And then B, from a user perspective, when you're just starting the game,
Mm-hmm.
like it opens up too much stuff right in the beginning. It's a bit intimidating when you have all these crazy units and options and weapons. So I wanted to keep it a little bit more simple in the beginning. Um, and that's kind of where that started. So from there, once I decided, one weapon type per unit type generally, I started making units from that point. I still wanted to have some variety and focus. Like the Templar unit, they're like the heavy armor unit. They're super slow. They don't do a ton of damage, but they can absorb huge amounts of damage. Versus the I don't know, the spearmen, they're really cheap, but if they can be equipped with tons of stuff. You can give them armor, which makes them a lot
Mm-hmm.
stronger. You can then give them horses, which makes them even stronger, and they get a new ability. So like they start out as like junk, and you
Mm-hmm.
have to like keep feeding them like resources and make them stronger. They're closest to the original design of units, so they have that spirit. But I guess, yeah, that's kind of where that came from. And the game that's closest to that I really enjoyed again was Lords of the Realm 2, that had different weapons and you could make different units, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you just got spears, so make spears.
Mm-hmm. And the unit build or unit creation in Veilguard, that of course goes hand in hand with resource generation, the management on that front. And that I think is a good segue into talking about kind of the I guess tower defense slash city building aspect of the game. So for people who haven't played the game yet, of course you get resources on a day-to-day basis. You can assign your various villagers to perform tasks, whether it's build armor, get more weapons, and then that will then be used on the following day. With the overall design, I guess what kind of I guess design considerations or balance kind of went into that system from your perspective?
So what went into the balance of the resources system?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what?
Yeah, like the resources and kind of managing the your town on that layer.
So yeah, I guess boy, the resources are they're just so critical to the whole game. Like it is Veilguard. It's these weapon types and resources. I wanted players to have like imperfect information to like work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So you might be gifted some random axes, by an event or something, and you didn't plan on making axemen, but now you have axes. So you have to do it that way. And same with as you progress from map to map. You might choose a new town. You don't necessarily want these units, but they're the best option, and this is what you're going with. So as you progress, you start formulating your strategy with what you were given instead of like the ideal one, if you had the choice of everything. And the balance, everything's kind of weighted. So it's actually pretty simple, but it'd be easier if you're a programmer to do. So axes are like the most valuable item, and spears are the cheapest. So they all have like relative values to each other. So when things are being exchanged and things are being dropped as like loot, so on, it's all based off of their relative value. You're not going to get like 10 axes like in the first level, but you might get 10 spears because they're really cheap. So that's a pretty simple way to do it. But yeah, I guess it can get out of control though as it multiplies up and up. Later in the game, you can get like 20 axes all at once.
And one thing that I thought was very interesting, again, talking about how what the game gives you can change your plan. I remember the first time I played through the first time I did a level, like it was pretty like routine. And the second time, the game gave me a trebuchet that I could build, and then I got that constructed. And now I had this super defensive unit that helped me during combat. And when it came to like the tower defense side of the player's options. Now, obviously, you talk about the units and giving them armor and upgrading them along that front, but how did you balance that with the static defenses with Valeguard?
So that's a tough one. It's hard to kind of put a price tag on the units. Some people see them as like really invaluable because they start out weaker,
Yeah.
and their price is a little bit higher in the game. And some people love them because they want like an RTS
Yeah.
experience. So that was really tricky to deal with and something I didn't totally expect. I myself put more work into the units because I think I just enjoy playing with them more. But my gut was that the units level up and the towers don't. So they are a more expensive upfront cost that will then grow. It's like an investment. So they're not as strong as a tower, but eventually they will be
Yeah.
stronger than a tower. Tower is like a set fee,
Mm-hmm.
a set defense. It's all right there for you. If you want to, get your basic defense in place, then you can just do towers. But troops are more of a, and troops you can move to different locations. So the mist changes. Some levels that's not a big deal. Other levels that completely throws you off. All your defenses over here, and now the enemy's over here. So troops can help with that. So that puts a higher price in my mind on them. But still, it's all relative to like how the player sees it. And I think a lot of people are like, you know, they want a tower defense game. That's the problem with the mashup.
Mm-hmm.
It's a half tower defense, half RTS. So some people want RTS and they devalue the towers, and then some people want, and vice versa.
Yeah.
I tend to do actually a mix of
Mm-hmm.
both.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm definitely more on the RTS side because, as you said, static defenses are great until the point when all the enemies are on the right side of the map and all your defenses are on the left, and then you're kind of in big trouble there.
Right.
I guess as a bit of a quick tangent, I'm sure for people watching us, we've all had our fair share of tower defense games we've enjoyed. Are there any that you found really interesting, Ryan?
Tower defense games?
Yeah.
Well, boy, I don't know. I'm a huge tower defense fan, and man, it's probably like my favorite casual genre. I've played a lot of casual games too because my previous major,
Mm-hmm.
career company was 8 years at a mobile studio, so put in a lot of casual gaming time. But the Kingdom Rush series is maybe one of my favorites, and then on the more unique side, I really like Creeper World. I find it fascinating that the enemy is just like this goo that just grows and grows. Like fending that off is just, I would have never thought of that, and it's a really fun game. I didn't play it for the longest time. People had told me about it, but um, It's mostly because the art's a little odd. Like when you look at it, you're like, what's the enemy? Like you can't really tell at a glance
Mm-hmm.
unless you see it in action. But I highly recommend that if you like tower defense, check out Creeper World because that's like one of my favorites.
Yeah. I need to check that one out. I think I bought that one on sale at some point. I spent like 2, 3 minutes in, and then I haven't went back to it. I really like. I think it was a Gemcraft. I think it was closed by Armored Games.
Yeah, that was a great one too.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's very interesting. Like, I'm sure we can sit here and name even more, but the tower defense genre is one of those that has a very wide berth in terms of its mechanics and systems. With Valeguard, as you said, with the added use of the units, it does change kind of the dynamic. Because some tower defense games let you upgrade the towers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot upgrade towers in Valeguard, right?
No, you can't. That's it's still on my update list. I actually want to be able to upgrade towers. It's a little bit of a technical issue, but not nothing major. It's more of a balance issue with
Yeah.
how the game's structured right now.
Mm-hmm. Because I think one of the more interesting aspects of Veilguard's design, as we said, is that you are restricted by what resources you have, but you can always dedicate more villagers to it. So there's always that push and pull of do I build more units or do I focus more on the actual infrastructure of my town? And I guess for you, like from like what you've played or what you've seen people play, what is like I guess like the general practical strategy in Veilguard, if there is one?
I suppose high level, and I actually put it in the tips.
Mm-hmm.
The simplest way to think about starting is like explosive population growth
Mm-hmm.
is going to set you up, for a longer term. Usually in the beginning, if you played the game a few times, you understand that the first wave or two aren't
Mm-hmm.
going to wipe you out. They might do some damage, they might hurt your hero, but they won't wipe you out. So you got to use those first few days to just explode your
Mm-hmm.
population. And then, depending on how conservative you are, the curve of risk starts to go
Mm-hmm.
up. So I like to take, I don't know, 3 or 4 days and just do houses only, and or a well. A well is a great way to explode your population. And then, once I hit a pretty good amount there, I immediately switch into troops or towers or
Mm-hmm.
something, get some kind of defense in place. And then from that point, you can kind of just back and forth and try and keep up with the enemy waves. But the very first thing has to be if you build troops in the beginning, you'll be okay against the first couple attacks, but then you won't have the manpower to do
Mm-hmm.
nearly as much later, and you might get steamrolled by wave after wave of enemies.
Yep. And of course, like the boom strategy always seems to work really well compared to just again focusing more on the military at the start. And as you said, the game is designed to like as we said, the waves themselves or the situations are randomly generated, but it's generally accepted that the further into a single level, any enemy attacks are going to become more and more harder to deal with.
Yep. And when you build a worker, you build a house, you get a new worker in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
He's super valuable in the beginning of the game or level because he's going to work for every day that you're there, as opposed to if you build him on the second to last night. He
Mm-hmm.
comes to town, he's
Yeah,
like, I'm here, and it's like
you're
he's not
done
going to be able to do
tomorrow.
much.
Yep. Now, I think with that, I'm just about out of design related questions. If anybody's watching us live right now who has a question for a game design perspective on Veilguard, please get them in at the comments. But I guess I do want to ask you a few questions regarding the early access phase of Veilguard. But before we do that, are there any parts of the game from a design perspective that we haven't touched on yet?
Hmm. I don't know. I mean, I think we've hit a lot of the major components.
Okay.
Um,
We'll see if any questions come in the next few minutes, but I do want to ask you a little bit about kind of the early access point of Veilguard, especially with it being like your first solo project as well. So, this is a question I always like to ask developers when they go on early access for the first time. Was early access a part of your original plan with Veilguard, or did that kind of come about during development?
that came about during development. My previous game, the VR game, we decided to not do early access and just get it as polished as possible, ship it. Um, I still don't. It's tough because you can't take one game and do both ways and
Yeah.
know what was the right answer. You're only ever comparing apples to oranges, you know. So if our last game was a totally different game,
Hmm.
what would it have done if it was early access? I don't know.
Hmm.
Granted, yeah, you're always going to catch more bugs. You're going to see more audience input and be able to react to that in a way that's going to be much more helpful. But at the same time, you know, you kind of only get one big reveal.
Hmm.
And it, I think, in a small way, stunts a little bit of your launch um, impact, but it's hard to tell. You know, I'm just guessing at that. Especially with press, like it's tricky to for press to be like, okay, it's just an early access game. Do I really want to write about it? And then when it comes time for full launch, they're
Yeah.
like, oh, well, this game's been out for a while. Do I really want to write about it? So there's some issues there. But I mean, the early access community is great. They're super helpful. They're the type of folks who like want to play these games and have input, and they will just help so much. I ended up doing it because by the time I got to where, you know, I'm like couple months out to where I think I'm going to ship it, I was like, do you think you'll be in a spot where you fixed everything and you know this is the best? I have no testers. You know, I just have
Hmm.
friends and family. I don't know how the general populace is going to react to this. I hadn't tested the game nearly enough with the target audience. You
Yeah.
know, you need these like tower defense players and like RTS players to play it. So I eventually just said, you know, I'm going to get it as good as I can, but I can't know how people are going to receive this. And I'm glad I did it because I ended up finding out there's a lot of RTS people who saw this game and wanted to play it, and it lacked a lot of the RTS standard controls and mechanics and things,
Yeah.
which I didn't see as like a huge thing at the time. But it's just if you have an RTS game, you have to have these controls, you know, these pieces to it.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's got a lot of those. I'd say on the whole, it's still like not it might annoy an RTS player slightly because it's not going to be as polished as StarCraft. You know.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think you had a really good point there, Ryan, about, again, that push and pull between going on early access or not. Because there are developers who have certainly spent many a long night trying to figure out what is the best avenue for their game. Because, as you said, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, especially when it comes to the press. Like, one of my favorite things I always like to talk about is that I see these early access games that go on, a year, 2 years ago. I play them, I finish them, they're great, and now we're just waiting for it to come out. And then some like major website goes, I just discovered this amazing game on early access, and we all knew about like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And as Mojo is saying in chat, there are people who do not like early access as well, and that's always that very tough spot because it can be very easy to get burned on an early access game. I'm sure everybody watching us live recorded has had that one game that has, completely failed its early access development.
That's tough.
Hmm. But I think, as you said, Ryan, one of the major advantages that for developers who don't have a pool of testers that they can play with or have, break their games essentially, you can basically get a lot of eyes on your game, and those are the people who are you're basically talking to your fans there, as you said with the RTS crowd who kind of gave you some advice about design.
Yeah, totally. It's I don't know, it's a tough call to make, but I do think there are other factors.
Hmm.
You know, if your game is like a very linear start to finish
Yeah,
story, early access is really hard
yeah,
because you're going to be like just like kind of ruining the game for all these people. Um, if it's replayable, like Valeguard, I tried to make it very replayable. I think that that's not so bad for early access because people can always come back in later, play with the new heroes, play with the new content, and enjoy it a lot.
hmm,
And I think it's important that early access remains like a small audience. It's actually a lot bigger than I expected. I think it should be like this audience of dedicated, almost experimental gamers, people who are
Yeah.
willing to jump in when something's half broken or half finished or whatever. And like, you know, that what they get in return is their input. They get to change the game and they get to alter the end experience by playing and giving feedback. But it's not for everyone. I
Oh
mean,
yes.
I actually filter against early access games on Steam because I want to play them when they're done.
Hmm.
But it's enormously helpful to get that feedback because there's no way to get that volume
Hmm.
of players, of hardware, of everything.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a really interesting point there about the early access audience. That there are people who will buy an early access game and are surprised that the game isn't 8% of the way done already. Just as you'll have people who are more than happy to break every aspect of your game to figure out what works and what doesn't. And it's very hard, I think, as a developer sometimes to know who is actually going to play your game on early access. I guess as a question for you, Ryan, when you put Valeguard on, like how much, like if you have like an idea, like how much was it like done or developed when it first went on early access?
I mean, I got a lot of feedback that it was very playable and like people were really happy with its state.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, I got it to where I thought it was like 95% done.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I thought it was. Um, and I'm glad that I did it that way because, I get it on there. I find that it's missing these basic controls, it's missing these
Yeah.
various things. And, that was important. But overall, you could play through the whole experience. It had its end game all the way through to the credits, everything. I
Yeah.
didn't want to have something that truly felt like unfinished in a way that was like it's missing content, it's missing levels. It just has some wall that says thanks for playing, we're not finished yet. Um, I know that's what some people like. They have to do that at some point, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the ideal early access is you release your game hoping that it's finished, and
Mm-hmm.
you get the last little bit you need to make it truly polished.
Yeah. And I mean, we see developers go both ways in this regard. Like I've seen, like one studio, Clay Entertainment, a lot of their early access games, they release them at a point where the game is pretty much there. Like as you said, all the core components are developed, most of the art is done, and then the rest of the time is polish and iteration. And then I've seen developers who go on with like again version 0.005, and they're expecting 2 to 3 years in early access to get this game to this point. And there's pros and cons to both approaches. There always is. I mean, I'm trying to think of some examples. I know a Deep Sky Derelicts that came out a few months ago. They were in early access for a good year and a half, I think maybe 2 years. And then, of
Wow.
course, we have something like Darkest Dungeon that I think they went on for, I want to say, 6 months to a year. I know they had a little bit of a hiccup in the middle there. But again, that was another game that it was pretty much done, like in terms of its core gameplay loop when it first went on. I guess as a question for you and for the audience as well, watching us live recorded, do you prefer to play early access games that are earlier in its development, or do you prefer again like sort of like the Valeguard or Clay Entertainment side that it's mostly done and the rest of the time it's just iteration and polish?
I mean, I have very different opinions as a developer versus player. As a player, I like to wait all
Mm-hmm.
the way until it's done. Um, that said, when I do buy an early access game, it's usually because I want that game so bad. I can't wait. I can't wait until it's finished. So I buy it and I accept that it's early. Like if I run into stuff that's not perfect, if it's not balanced, that's fine. I jumped into this. I'm gonna roll with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I saw in the chat about Midway, I'm pretty sure they are not, but someone took over like Mortal Kombat and different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they bought the company. I'm not sure, but they went bankrupt. So I just right after I left, they went bankrupt. So I got like this letter that was like, "Oh, if Midway owes you money, like tell the government because they're out of money."
Mm-hmm. That's always a
So
fun
yeah.
letter to get too.
But yeah, early access for me, I like to wait until the game's done, and if I do jump on board, I'm well aware of what I'm getting into. I played a ton of Darkest Dungeon
Mm-hmm.
early, for
Yeah.
example, because I just wanted to play it so bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was so hard in the beginning. Back in the early access days, it was just mean.
Oh yes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, same goes for something like going through Dead Cells, like the very first iteration of that, and how much that game has changed. And I know they're still working on it as we're recording this too. And it's always, I think, tricky to know when to jump onto a game. Like I have friends who they will buy a game on early access. I like that comment in chat. I have friends who will buy a game on early access and they will not touch it at all until they get the 1.0 release. And then I have some people who they will ignore a game. It doesn't matter how great it is. It doesn't matter whatever, as long as it has that early access tag on it.
That's pretty cool. I like those people. We need, you know, a dedicated group of them. Uh, I think that's the issue. I think maybe Steam could do a little bit better job of explaining like you're going into like a shit show here, pardon my
Yeah.
French, but it's you don't know what state the game's going to be in. There's not really any kind of guarantee on that.
Mm-hmm.
The developers try and post what they can on their page, but some of them are more transparent than others. So I think it's the early access people have to understand that what they're getting on board with is who knows.
Yeah. And that takes me to one other early access question for you, and then I think we'll move on to like our final set of questions. Another thing that I see as a consequence of early access is developer burnout on a title, where the game they just hit that point where they don't want to work on it anymore. And we saw this very recently with Stonehearth, that was in development for I want to say 5, maybe 6 years, maybe a little bit more than that. And developers just finally said, we can't work on this anymore. We're going to start to move away from it, and it started to anger some of the hardcore fans there. And like as we've said, it's always that risk when it comes to an early access game, and even by extension, a kickstarted early access game. When you throw in, Kickstarter bonuses and stretch goals into the mix.
100%. Yeah. I guess I mean, you want my opinion on that topic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh, what's the exact question there?
yeah. Kind of like what were your thoughts on like when, I guess that kind of burnout happens? Like, what is someone
I
supposed to
think
do?
there's a bunch of factors. I mean, like the burnout, I don't know, and this is just me speculating because
Mm-hmm.
I've only done one early access. I have played a bunch of early access. I've
Yeah,
followed a bunch of early access. So I'm not exactly a perfect expert for this, but I have worked on a ton of games. And anytime, when your team is not into the game they're working on, that's like a huge
yeah,
fundamental problem. It's very difficult to solve. You're in deep trouble. It could be a variety of things, but ultimately it means they're not excited about the game.
mm-hmm.
Like that excitement can usually get you over a lot of humps.
Yeah,
And if they're not excited about the game, it, how are you going to get your audience excited about it? So I think some of the burnout can be from that, and it can also be from the game's success. I don't expect someone to keep working on a game for like 7 years if the game's not making the money to keep that going. And even still, 7 years creatively is a
yeah,
long time. I that was my whole career at Backflip. Like 7 years, you get the itch to move on. Like even I think it should be proportionate early access to the game's development. So that's just my like gut. I feel like if you work on a game for like I did 7 months, 3 months early access. If you work on a game for like a year, maybe you do like 4 months or something. Like try and keep it smaller than the game's development cycle.
mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be the polish you put on the end, not the majority of the development.
Yeah,
That said, there's plenty of games that release and then have like DLC and do a really great job of supporting and upgrading but that's I see different than early access. Early
mm-hmm.
access is the polish.
Yeah,
DLC is like you're coming in for seconds. Like here,
yeah.
have some more.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more and more that it's important to understand when to go on early access. Because as we said, like at the beginning, people were just literally taking like their first Unity build and posting it on early access to play, and a lot of people got very annoyed with that. And again, it's very
Yeah,
hard just due to every design being its own unique project. Like, when do you know that your game is good enough for early access? And I guess that's a good question for you, Ryan. Like, when you went on early access with Valeguard, like, were there like any like feelings or anything that you kind of like felt that, I have a game here that I think it's ready for early access?
Well, I was super nervous. That was a feeling I felt. Um, but like I kind of mentioned before, in my mind, it was like I felt like my game was like 95% done. Now, there's like there most likely would be like this hidden 20% that you don't even you're not even thinking about that the players are going to show you. But if you feel and the testing you're able to do, it's like 95% done, and you're a solo developer, you don't have a huge testing crew, I would recommend doing early access at that point. But I also had a small scope for the game. I didn't want to go like crazy huge. The game could be a lot bigger and deeper and this and that. But I am one person, and it was my first solo game, so I said I'm going to make this size game from day one. In my head, I had the scope figured out. I wanted to get something out in about 9 months. So, early access 7 months, final game 10 months, pretty good. And that had a lot to do with it too. So it was 95% done per my original goal of what I wanted Valeguard to be. So I was like, let's do it. I didn't feel confident enough because of how many unknowns there are, especially with all the RNG and all. I didn't feel confident enough to just do a full launch at that point. I'm glad I didn't, but it's mostly just because of testing.
Yeah. And again, as we said, yeah, so into his question, but just to extend on that, I think as we've said, it's just very important to understand whether or not your core gameplay loop is fully developed enough to go on early access. I think that seems to be, step one to success on here. Like, you don't want to put a game on there that, and as you were saying earlier, that feeling that if the team is not enjoying their own game, something is terribly wrong during the development cycle. But getting to Mojo's question for people who are just listening to us, Mojo asked, so was Valeguard a success in your eyes? And was he thinking it was going to be a bestseller or praying it wasn't a flop? Hey, 4 and 2, you just made it as we were
Hey,
talking.
I hope you don't get any bugs. I hope you have a great time. It, in my eyes, is a success for sure. I didn't even like a year ago think that I could necessarily make my own game. I had a hunch, but there were so many things I had to figure out along the way, and I just was hoping for a learning experience. And I was able to pay my bills for the year. I got myself a nice little salary. It's not much, but it's doable, and it's more than I expected. So I'm really happy with that. And I also am just really happy. Some people are really spicy on the reviews, and they'll leave like a really bad review because maybe they encountered a bug or something, that just made them have a really bad experience. Those get to me, but the people who enjoy it really enjoy it, and that's a pretty big take home for me.
Hold on 1 second. Oh, there you go. You kind of like froze for a second with the internet.
Oh, shoot, sorry.
Oh,
Am I still frozen?
okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. But it's great to hear that the game has at least exceeded your expectations. Because, again, as we all know, game development is no exact science. And I've unfortunately spoken to developers who their game did not do as well as they would have hoped for. And I do want to ask you about what you have planned next. We'll say that for kind of the wrap up of our cast later on. So I think with that, we're about an hour in. We'll move on to like our final set of questions, and then we'll begin to wrap it up. So I'm going to say maybe like 20 or 30 more minutes if that works for you, Ryan.
No problem.
All right. So it is time for a talk about programming with two people who aren't programmers. Because as we've said, Valeguard was built entirely without programming coding. You said it was visual scripting?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And right now, I'm sure again, if my fan Mike is watching or he is somewhere out there, he probably just got like a sharp pain in his head as we just said that about discussing programming without either of us having that background. But I thought this was a very interesting point. And again, since a lot of my audience are either students or prospective or established game developers, I think this is a very interesting topic to kind of end our cast on. So, for people, especially for the students watching, when we say that the game was visually scripted, what does that mean?
So it's some people consider it unfair to say that it's not programming. I guess the better way to say that is it doesn't use. I didn't write any lines of code, but in a way, it's like programming. Visual scripting uses a lot of the same fundamentals as code. It, uses variables and all the same basics, but like all the same variables you find in like C++, you'll find in like most of these visual scripting systems. But I I work a lot better with it as a art based person because you get visuals, you get a GUI. It can show for any given system you're working on the flow as it goes through. Let's say just to use something simple, someone's going to take damage, so you have this little hit point tracker on your character, and the visual scripting will show they took damage, and now it's subtracting hit points, and now it's playing like the blood effect, and that all works really well for debugging and figuring out how your game works with me. And the way you put those together, you just add these states, and the states can do a variety of things. You kind of have a list of actions, so a lot of the code's kind of almost already done under the hood. So things like if you want an arrow to fly through the air, there's an action. It's like move forward, translate. If you want to give it a little arc, you add another action that's like rotate it a little. So you build your game like that by adding these visual boxes that flow into each other, and it's a lot easier to understand and track. A lot of different visual scripting systems out there. Unreal has one built in. It's called Blueprints. The one I use is called Playmaker. It's an add-on for Unity, but it's pretty good. I've heard Unity is going to be building their own visual scripting that goes in built into the game or the engine. And another popular one is Game Maker Studio. The whole engine is basically built around visual scripting, so it's somewhat popular. I don't know a whole lot of people who use it exclusively, but it's more something that's usually used for the designers or artists to be able to get hooks into the game to do things besides just art. Maybe you need to hook up an effect to a character or a weapon. Well, visual scripting can open that up for someone who doesn't know how to write code. I just use it to build the whole game, which is a bit weird, but it worked kind of.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Game Maker, Ryan, because I was just thinking of that as you were describing how like the overall process worked. So, do you like do anything in terms of like if then statements or conditionals, or is it all built into like the various like actions or boxes that you put together?
Well, depending on the system, they're all kind of different. So, Blueprints, for example, and there's like Bolt for Unity. It's a little bit. I don't know if the term is higher level or lower level, but you can really get in the nitty gritty where you're building almost actions yourself, and you can get into the roots of the engine. Playmakers are like a step up from that, where you don't get quite into the roots, but there are all the same kinds of variables, and I don't exactly know the programming terms for these things. Maybe functions or is the right term, but they're the same principles, but some of the stuff is built out for you. So there's like some more advanced actions, like a smooth follow action. So that one's really pretty advanced, and it does a ton of work for you, where you just put it on an object and you say follow this thing, and it'll just follow it. Unity has some items like this, but Playmaker has it for like everything. So some actions are really like simple, like it's just like change a bool, which is like a true false, change it
Hmm.
from true to false. It's like
Yeah.
really really simple.
Yeah.
Other actions like the smooth follow are a lot more complex,
Hmm.
and they're making actions all the time for it for my system. So there's a pretty cool little community, people writing new actions and all that.
Okay. And just to clarify, the solver used was called Playmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And did you say that was an extension of Unity, or is that its own software?
It's an add-on to Unity.
Okay. All right.
It's like I want to say like $40. I'm not sure though. It's in the asset store.
And I guess for people watching this, again, for like students, how easy was it for you to like use or learn Playmaker? Again, you came from an animation background, not a programming or design one.
A lot easier than code. It's still got its learning curve, you know. I mean, it's it does like a lot of the same, almost all the same things as code. I mean, I do everything. My Steam achievements, like saving and loading the game data, it's all through Playmaker. So it's pretty deep, but getting started, I feel like is way faster. So you can get started with a really simple like little game and get things rolling and start feeling out like, okay, now what do I want? I want enemies. Okay, then I want them to chase. You just add bit by bit. It's a great place to start, I think. Even if you eventually want to learn code, I still highly recommend trying something like a visual scripting system just to get your feet wet. That's for me. That's it was enormously helpful. It probably took me though to get to where I am now. I mean, I was messing around with visual scripting before Valeguard, probably about a year to 2 years before I even started Valeguard.
Hmm.
So I used it on projects I was working on, but I wasn't the sole developer. I just did little pieces here and there.
Hmm. And with the actual art of Veilguard, I'm assuming that did you create any like art yourself with that, or did you use like other assets for it?
So the art's interesting. I bought a lot of assets from the asset store. You know, I'm one person, and the
Hmm.
majority of my time is going to be spent building the
Yeah.
game and not building like the art. Especially because like I'm not a programmer, and even just using Playmaker, I'm a bit slower than your average like Joe. So I did buy a bunch of art, but I tweaked almost every bit of it. Everything from changing like a texture or a color to, a lot of the models were completely like skewed and changed to be like, I don't know, more readable at smaller scales and things. And all the heroes that have like a ton of custom models. I used a little tool that's another add-on to Unity to model in Unity, so I didn't have to have like 3D Studio Max or Maya or something. I could just model right there. If I need a hat, just make it. And then I use Photoshop for like textures and stuff. But um, yeah, I mean, for most of the like environment stuff, it started with a asset that I bought from the asset store, and then I would massage things or like cobble things together to get a lot of the art in Veilguard.
Yeah. And I know, and I'm sure you, as well as the audience, have heard there's always that very strong stigma, I think, from a lot of people about the term asset flipping and stuff like that when it comes to games. But really, like, if you do something with those assets in a unique way or an original way, it does save a lot of time and money. Especially, again, like if you're not an artist, how else are you going to get assets in for your game?
Yeah, yeah, especially if you're not an artist. I mean, it's tough. Um, it's really tough with a small studio to deal with like the art constraints because it may not be technically difficult all the time, but it's hugely time absorbing.
And expensive too if you want to hire
Expensive.
someone either on a full time or even just on a contract basis.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't know. I also happen to find like some assets. This is exactly what
Yeah,
I wanted it to look like. This, if I were to make it myself, it would look like this.
yeah.
So I kind of lucked into that a few different sets there, but I imagine like some of the units you might see in other games. I tried to change them and like make them my own as much as possible, but it's possible you'll see some of them, some of the fairly generic ones. Um, eh.
But I'm trying to think if there is anything else, at least from a visual scripting point of view. I guess for you, Ryan, any aspects behind building Valeguard that we didn't touch yet?
Hmm. It's crazy because I wish I would have documented the process better. It's so much happened in so little time. Well, there was kind of one design thing. It's small, but it did just pop into my head.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I originally built the game where like you didn't have to pay any population for anything, and it seems like a super small thing, but it changed the game just enormously when I added that. I found that you could do your population explosion in the beginning, and then just keep growing, and there's nothing like whittling down your populace at all. And it would get out of control. Like it was really hard to balance against. So I added that layer of the more defenses you have, it lowers your population, which makes it harder to build more defenses. And that ebb and flow came out of that. And it was just this one little change. And actually, the original play testing, I did a play testing out here in Colorado with like a pretty big group. It was like 20 people, 30 people, and it didn't have that feature in there. So the RTS pros would just crush the game, and then like the more novice people, they didn't understand that like exponential growth factor. So
Mm-hmm.
I added that in there. I think it made it a little.
Yeah. And Benjamin had put a question in chat, and I just thought of one question I want to ask you, and then we'll get to his question. From like a technical support side of things with visual scripting, is it any different or harder or easier when it comes to finding and dealing with bugs? By the fact that again that you're not doing like actual programming or scripting on like at that level of detail.
I'd say in the same way that it's easier for me to use in general, it's also easier for me to find bugs. I'm sure a programmer would be like, this is way harder to find bugs
Mm-hmm.
because they know how to find bugs in code. They're
Yeah.
used to seeing how it works. I would find like I've tried to program before, and there would be things where just like some semicolons wrong somewhere, and I don't. It's telling me something else, and it's just everything's busted, and it's impossible to find for me. Some people are like, "Well, of course it's there, and
Yeah.
you should know that," but
I
I would be searching like line by line for something out of place, and it was just obnoxious. With Playmaker, it will show you the state that things went wrong. It'll highlight it. It'll tell you some information about what it thinks went wrong in that state. It'll be like it went here and never left, and it's still there. Or it's looping here and it's looping like way too many times, so we had to stop things.
mm-hmm.
It tells you a lot, and it's visual. That's the piece that helps me. You're
Yeah.
looking at all these boxes, and it shows you where things went wrong, and then you can kind of put together the rest.
Yeah. And what you just said there about trying to hunt down the errant semicolon, I think you just described everybody's first programming experience of all time.
Yeah. I mean, and I've tried a variety of languages. you
Mm-hmm.
know, everything from like old Flash, like action script to like C++. Like everything Unity works with. I tried to
Mm-hmm.
see if like maybe one language is easier than another. Um, uh, I got most of the way through making an actual action script, but it's just still all the same kind of issue.
Yeah.
It's just looking at nothing and just
Yeah, I'm definitely the same way as that, Ryan. Like I'm more of a visual learner myself. It's why, like for a lot of video games, I'm better at puzzles that I can, grasp and see what's going on. Like why aren't things working, rather than having a lot of stuff happen behind the scenes, and then trying to dig through it. Like it's why when I play the games from Zachtronics, like TIS 100, Shenzhen IO, they're all just basically programming puzzles. I have like no idea what I'm looking at.
right, exactly.
All right. But as I said in chat, any final questions for Ryan? We're going to get to Benjamin's question now. But you have anything else to ask him, whether it's design, program, the Matrix exactly, or
Blonde,
anything
brunette,
else?
redhead.
Yeah. Please get them in now. But for Benjamin's question, he wanted to ask you about licensing the assets. So I guess how did that work? Especially by the fact that I know that with a lot of the platforms or with a lot of the engines, they have different rules for licensing based on the success of the game.
Yeah, the engines like Unreal's like one thing. That's
Yeah.
you gotta pay per a percent per
Mm-hmm.
your success. So that's something that some people are not into. But until then, it's like totally free. So I mean, you can't beat that either.
Mm-hmm.
As far as assets go, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of assets I've seen and that I generally work with and look at are just open ended free,
Mm-hmm.
like to just use. They do say that you almost all of them you can't distribute the assets as the assets. So I can't buy
Mm-hmm.
some you know fantasy soldier and
Yeah.
like put him back on the asset store under my name and
Yeah.
just resell him. No, like if I use him in a game, that's what it's for. But I can't just sell him to sell him.
Yeah.
So that's usually the license that you work with.
Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me of when I found some stock footage for my first book that the art is free. Like someone made it to specifically put it on an open source site, and I can certainly use that as my cover. But I can't take that and then say, "Oh, I made this cover. This is my art. Take it from me." That kind of thing.
Boy, Benjamin's got a good train of questions here actually that I'm not actually sure about.
Yeah.
I know that the game focus is like, yeah, you can make whatever you want. Game you can make, whatever platform, whatever you want to do. But like, if you want to use it like in advertising, or if you want to use
Yeah.
something else, I don't know. And if someone uses those assets too, that's the problem. They can, and they
Yeah.
do. In fact, in my last game, Just in Time, we used a very common asset set in that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did a good job with it, and it's a really fun game. But boy, are those assets popular.
Yeah. and and that's why I was saying I think that's where that negative conception or perception comes with the acid flip. That you can see the same fire effect, in 15 different games, or like for moviegoers, there's that famous like the Wilhelm scream that shows up in so many different pieces there. And Mojo
Right.
asks, what made you go with that specific aesthetic for Valeguard?
Well, I knew I wanted like a grid because I just wanted like visual clarity of you play something and it's blocking the spot or it's not,
Mm-hmm.
as best I could get it. And then I found this asset set that's got like it's a grid based system and it has elevation. I knew I was going to have to make a ton of stuff from scratch, but it was like a really great base. So mechanically I've started with that first. Like I generally when I think of art for a game, I start mechanics first, and then I try and back into like a really cool style if I can, because
Mm-hmm.
I think really gameplay comes first for me.
Yeah.
So I kind of based it off of the grid factor.
All right. And the second part of his question, I guess, why did you go with like fantasy as opposed to like a science fiction or World War II or anything like that?
I don't know. It's kind of just where my original idea was for it, but it did cross my mind. You know, I I thought about sci-fi a little bit, and I do think about this a lot all the time with various games. When I come up with a game, it's not necessarily going to stay in the original idea genre, kind of uh, as far as aesthetic goes. So this one, I mean, a lot of it did have to do with the asset set, and I also feel like as a first game, I want to try and get a pretty big accessibility factor in there. Maybe sci-fi is just a little bit less, you know, accessible than fantasy, and then fantasy is a little more open and like it's you can just make up whatever. It's magic.
Yeah.
You can do that a little bit in sci-fi too, but I think it just is totally open in fantasy.
All right. I know we are approaching just about an hour and 20 in, and I think I am just about out of questions for you, Ryan. I just have a few just final set, and then we will say goodnight. So if anybody has anything else, this is going to be it. But I guess before we move on, then, any final thoughts or things regarding visual scripting that we didn't touch on that you would like to bring up now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a handful of people watching, but if any of them are game developers or people who want to like get into building a game that haven't done it before, I highly recommend checking it out. It's not something that you're gonna like learn overnight, but it's way, I think, more accessible to visually sort of oriented people. And whatever system you use, be it Unity's Playmaker, Unreal's Blueprints, Game Maker Studio. I just want to put in a plug for that because until I stumbled across it, I had no idea this sort of thing existed, and I just written off making my own game as impossible. So it's possible for those who are like me.
Oh, you're still young when it comes to these podcasts, Mojo. 90 minutes. This is pretty much like a short sprint for some of these guys. We've done 2.5 to 3 hour ones,
Oh, all
so
right.
we can just keep going, which I know is great for you folks. But we'll eventually fall asleep here. I guess one final question regarding the programming for me again, as somebody who doesn't do programming at any reasonable level, I guess why did you go with Playmaker exactly versus like Game Maker? Because I know Game Maker, like that's the one that I've heard a lot more of, and talking to you was the first time I heard about something like Playmaker.
Mm-hmm. And it's really just kind of a coincidence. I worked in Unity at my last job, so I had a good Unity background. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do in Unity that's not like building a game.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with art, I was the art director, so everything from animation to UI to everything, I worked with all these different pieces. So I found out about Playmaker before I found out. I knew about Game Maker, but I didn't realize it was scripting based.
Mm-hmm.
So I got pretty knee deep into Playmaker before I even found out about uh, Game Maker Studio.
Great. So I think with that, for my just final set of questions, this will just kind of be like, what's like future plans for you. So as we've said, Valeguard's been out for just about 3 months, maybe give or take, as of now. Are you still working on the game or supporting it with like new content?
Yeah, although recently I've been hung up a bit because I upgraded to the latest Unity, and Valeguard does not like the
Oh
latest
no.
Unity. So I'm struggling with that a bit. Again, it's partly because I'm just new to this, and also I'm not a programmer, so I just can't dig in there and just fix it. So I'm just like wandering in the dark trying to get this to play nice together with each other. And there are a few things, especially bone fix. I was hoping to get another, maybe two heroes in there, but there's a pretty big roadblock for me right now. So I'm working my way through it. And there's definitely more games to come after Valeguard. Um, the way I'd like to work going forward is any game I work on, I don't want to just be like, I'm done forever. This game is done. I want to be like, I'm starting a new game, and my primary focus is here. But if I see things that I want to do and upgrade and fix with this game, I still will do that. It might pull away from new projects, but like, there's no reason that you can't like pop in every once in a while to improve the situation, especially if it's still got like a growing audience and people enjoying it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my attitude on post games versus future games.
Great. And like we said earlier, it's great to hear that Valeguard has done well for you as well, Ryan. I guess for people watching us, either live or recorded, can you tease anything about your next game now?
I want to really bad, but I don't think it would be fair to show much at this point. I have a few different prototypes I'm working on, and depending on, I mean, I might not make any of them. So I feel like I'd show something, and it might not be something that I ever make. It wouldn't necessarily be helpful for people. Um, as soon as I do decide on an idea for sure moving forward with, then I'll start posting about it. But right now, I'm just trying crazy stuff.
All right. Well, I think with that, we are. Using the blizzard too much. All right. I think with that, we will wrap things up for our cast. So, for you, Ryan, if people want to follow you on social media or anything like that, do you have any social PR thing you'd like to plug?
Sure. I guess that my two Twitters are Lost Tower Games and RJ Drag, and that's it pretty much. I mean, I got some stuff on Facebook, but um, more than anything, if you're interested in the game, at least go check it out on Steam. Valeguard uh, just came out this year, so thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun.
No problem. It was great to have you on, Ryan. And I think with that, we will say goodnight. So, for people watching this record right now, you can find, I'll put a link to my first look video on Valeguard in the description down below. And if you'd like to watch this cast ad free and early, be sure to check out my Patreon, patreon.com/UWBicer to get VIP access. For any developers watching who would like to come on, we are always looking for new guests, so please don't hesitate to get in touch. And of course, be sure to check out Valeguard on Steam and whatever else Ryan decides to work on in the future. All right, but with that said, for the people watching this live right now, I'll be back on later tonight for my regular game streams. And Ryan, if you're free in the future, we can always have you back on for another cast.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. So, everyone, thanks again for tuning into this week's episode of the Perceptive Podcast. Tune in next time for another discussion about the art and craft of game design. Until then, take care.